segment 3, where we stand. Ed, you talked about the swing by the end of the GDP dropped 6%. Give me the first quarter.
2009, first quarter 2009 to fourth quarter 2009.
And fourth quarter of 2009, it recovers by 6. So there's a 12% swing. All right. So
for a quarter.
Per quarter. This is
annual rate for a quarter.
Right.
Annual rate for okay.
The economy would have had to drop 6 percentage points for 4 quarters to have actually fallen 6%.
Right. Okay, got it. Thank you very much. That actually is quite important. All right. So again, layman's question: since the end of the Second World War, the general rule seems to be the deeper the recession, the sharper the recovery. Right. So having just gone through the worst recession since the end of the Second World War, we ought to be feeling a rocket rumbling underneath this economy by now. Dow's monkeying around 10,000 and has for some months. May jobs report shows about 450,000 jobs created, but only 41,000 of those are in the private sector. The rest accounted for entirely by federal hiring. So what's going on? This is not a roaring economy. This is not a sharp recovery, is it?
Well, you have to distinguish GDP growth from labor market growth.
All right.
So GDP growth has been pretty strong in the past half a year. In fact, when I left CEA at 2008, we had a forecast, and we said, what would it look like in early 2010? And we said 5%, and everybody thought that was ridiculous. Well, it turned out it's 4.5% over the past 6 months. Unfortunately, it's backwards. It was 6% in the fourth quarter of 2009, and then 3% in the first quarter of 2010. So that's not such a great sign. The problem has been that the labor market has not responded very quickly. And I don't think that any of the gimmicks, any of the so-called job creation techniques that the government has attempted to use have been effective. Unfortunately, we only know one way to create jobs, and that is to make sure that the economy grows and grows rapidly. The best prescription for that is keeping tax rates low and making sure that they stay low into the future. As you know, 2010 is a key year. It is the year during which many of the taxes that went into effect under President Bush, tax cuts, are going to expire. Capital gains, dividend reductions, as well as the highest marginal rate will most likely change. Those are impediments to investment, they're impediments to growth, and they're impediments to hiring.
Mark,
let me come back to this issue of the growth, because I think it's likely that when the recession is dated, it will be dated as having ended in the summer of 2009. If we date since then, 1 quarter earlier than the numbers Ed did, we've averaged 3% growth since the recession ended.
Which is
for
bad.
3 quarter. In the other 2 comparable large, deep recessions, 1974-5 and 1981-2,
right,
when the unemployment got up to 9% and 10.8%, higher than this time around, by the way, respectively, the economy grew between 5 and 6% for 3 years. So this is an anemic recovery. It's poor in job growth, and it's modest at best in GDP growth, in my opinion.
George Will, writing in June, quote, investors and employers, now I'm quoting, are uncertain about when interest rates will rise and by how much. That's a Ben Bernanke question, but now here's some Barack Obama questions. They do not know how badly the economy will be burdened by the expiration of the Bush tax cuts. They know the cost of Obamacare will be higher than advertised, but not how much higher. They do not know the potential costs of cap and trade. They do not know how the financial sector will be altered and impeded by the many new regulatory rules and agencies. If you're an employer or a venture cap, why would you hire people right now? I mean, so I guess what I'm probing for here is actually 2 questions. One question is, you both came of age and your studies, you were academics during this period, but how bad does what we went through, how bad is it by comparison with the late 70s, say? Is this just a repeat of a kind of cyclical something or other we ought to expect every 20, 30 years?
I think in terms of the effect on the economy, it's quite comparable to the late 70s and early 80s. I don't think this is any worse.
Okay.
I agree, actually.
However,
yeah,
I mean, you know, when you have 20 or 22% interest rates, when you have 10.8% unemployment, the difference is a new path was charted for economic policy in the early 1980s, which had lower taxes, more sensible and less regulation, and the like, okay? Lower inflation, better monetary policy, sounder money. So that's number one.
And Clinton, in effect, validated it, making it bipartisan, so there's real stability and certainty, right?
Well, yeah, we argued over a point or two of GDP and taxes and so on back and forth subsequently, but Clinton started from the center left and moved to the center. Obama started more from the far left, and we'll see if he moves to the center left.
A last question about how weak or how strong the economy is right now. One more reference to Arthur Laffer here, who argued in the Wall Street Journal in June, made the point that the tax cuts, all kinds of tax cuts, are set to expire on January 1st, and made the point that human beings respond to incentives, so individuals and enterprises are shifting, realizing as much income as they can this year to beat the tax hikes next year. There's income shifting going on, and in fact the economy looks better because of that than it's likely to. So here's the money quotation. When we pass, this is Art Laffer, when we pass the tax boundary of January 1st, 2011, my best guess is that the train goes off the tracks. If you thought deficits and unemployment have been bad lately, you ain't seen nothing yet. In other words, the economy looks stronger in some way today than it really is. Do you buy that?
Well, I buy it a little bit. Everything that he's talking about is anticipated. So this is not like something that's going to come as a big surprise to us. It's also a little bit difficult to substitute from the future to the present. It's not the case that people are working very hard today because they know their tax rates are going to go up in the future. I don't think there's a lot of evidence that that's the case. In fact, one of the things that is different in this recession and a bit in the previous recession, early 2001, is that the labor market has responded somewhat differently. The cut in the number of jobs is much more dramatic than it was in previous recessions. Productivity growth has remained high, which is unusual for recessions, at least historically. It used to be that during a recession, what would happen is labor would stay on, productivity would go down, and then as the recovery came on, productivity would increase. In this particular recession, unfortunately, from workers' points of view, the layoffs, the amount of job cuts has been much more significant, and employers have gotten much more savvy about reducing their costs.
So saying productivity goes up and employment goes down is close to the same thing, right? Because productivity is just a measure of output per worker.
That's right.
To what extent is what we're watching a ratification of the technological revolution? Employers are using this moment to shift in technology and shift out human beings.
I don't think it's quite that. No? I think technology and people are complements, not substitutes. So as we look to the future, technology is not a bad thing for workers. Technology is a good thing for workers. The problem is the business cycle effect on workers. And unfortunately, this has been a period when we've seen very significant layoffs relative to the drop in GDP. So I agree with Mike. If you look back and you say, gee, is this the worst recession? You know, people always say this is the worst recession since the Great Depression. First of all, it's a lot different from the Great Depression. It may be the worst by some measures. It may not be the worst by others. If you looked at unemployment rates, the early 80s is a bit worse. But the point is, this is a very bad recession along the lines of the kinds that we've seen in the past. What's different is that the job picture, I think, is less promising as we move into the future, and that's unfortunate.